The day I was wheeled into the operating room, my family and my boyfriend were all by my adopted sister's side, watching her competition. On that day, something unexpected happened during my surgery. The tumor in my brain was removed, but my nerves were damaged. I no longer have the emotions of a normal person. There was a tumor in my brain. I originally wanted to tell my parents and my boyfriend about this, but my parents were busy buying plane tickets to accompany my adopted sister to an international dance competition. My boyfriend has also been working overtime a lot recently. My finger lingered on the chat interface for a long time, and in the end, I chose to delete the message that I had already typed out. I know that no one will care about things related to me, even if I tell them. After all, in everyone's heart, my existence is not even 1/10,000th as important as that of my adopted sister. My adopted sister, Linda, is the daughter of my father's comrade-in-arms. When she was 6 years old, a car accident tragically took the lives of her parents. Linda was driven away and ostracized by her relatives. In the end, she was dirty all over and ended up on the streets. My father, who had come to pay his respects to his old friend, found her. Since then, she became the second daughter in our family. That year, I was 10 years old, and Linda was 6. My parents told me, "Snow, you're already a big kid, you should learn to take care of your sister." I didn't really know how to take care of a sister. All I knew was that Linda was always so vulnerable. She didn't have to do anything. She just stood there, looking at me with her red, tearful eyes, and everything of mine would become hers. At the age of 10, I lost my bedroom and moved into the guest room. When I was 12, my piano lessons were cancelled, and the family piano was sold. The vacated piano room became Linda's dance studio. After I turned 15, I never wore new clothes again. I always just rotated between 2 sets of school uniforms. My parents didn't care either. They dressed Linda up beautifully and would praise their daughter's good looks to everyone they met when they went out. From then on, I didn't go home very often. The year I was about to graduate from university, Linda went to a university in another city. My parents briefly thought of me. They often called me to ask about my living situation and occasionally sent me job recruitment information in the city where I lived on my phone. Sending the orphan of his comrade-in-arms to university was one of the most important achievements in my father's life. He was in high spirits and said he would come to my city to visit me. By the way, he wanted to check if my boyfriend, who I had been dating for 3 years, was reliable. I had long since given up any expectations of them, but I still booked a hotel and a restaurant to receive them. However, I didn't expect that, along with them, there would also be Linda, whom I hadn't seen for a long time. On that day, her smile was especially innocent, just like when she first came to my home. She smiled at my boyfriend like that all night long. Later, I saw Linda's profile picture at the top of my boyfriend Simon's WeChat chat list. Before being wheeled into the operating room, I still couldn't hold back and called my parents. The call was only connected for 3 seconds, and my parents' anxious voices came from the other end. "Snow, we're about to board the plane. Your sister's competition is more important. We'll talk about anything else when we get back." I didn't even have a chance to say a word before the call was hung up. I was a bit stunned and stared at the phone screen. Just then, a new post from my boyfriend Simon popped up. He said he was going to pursue his own mountains and seas, and the attached picture was a plane ticket with the name of the country where Linda was going to compete printed on it. I stared fixedly at the screen until my aunt beside me couldn't stand it anymore and forcefully took my phone away. "Auntie has already signed the consent form for you. Don't worry. Auntie will take responsibility for anything that happens." She stroked my head lovingly and then let out a long sigh. "My eldest brother has been muddle-headed in his actions these years. It's just a pity for you. Go on, child. I'll be waiting for you outside until you come back." I was wheeled into the operating room, and the anesthesia gradually took effect in my body. Before losing consciousness, I couldn't help but wonder if my parents would shed tears for me if I died during this surgery. And Simon, I thought that when I got out, I must tell him in person. I already knew that he had changed his heart. This time, I decided to leave him. The story between Simon and me wasn't particularly spectacular, but in the university campus back then, it was also a beautiful story recognized by teachers and classmates. The beginning of the story was very cliched. The president of the student union, who had an excellent family background and appearance, reached out to support a logistics staff member who had fainted due to low blood sugar after being busy all day without eating during a college orientation event. The second time they met, he specially kept 2 candies in his pocket for her. Since then, keeping a candy in his pocket for me had become Simon's habit. In his eyes, I was someone who would fall over if the wind blew a little. He always looked at me worriedly and said, "Snow, I've never been so afraid of losing someone before." He said that I meant something different to him than anyone else. There was always a special place for me by his side, just like there would always be candies ready for me in the pocket of his coat. But the last time, after staying up all night to finish 2 meetings, when I reached into Simon's coat pocket again, I only took out a strange lipstick, Chanel Silver Tube 116, Linda's favorite shade. I quietly put the lipstick back in his pocket and learned to bring my own candies from then on. My life became completely different with the age of 10 as a watershed. Since I was 10 years old, I have been trying to get used to living without relying on anyone. I lowered my expectations of everyone. As long as I don't have expectations, I won't be disappointed, and I won't fall into despair after the disappointment accumulates to a certain extent. But after all, I'm human, and I can't be as carefree as I imagined. Simon spent a year pursuing me and then took great care of me in the following 3 years. In total, it was 4 years. He won me over bit by bit and made me feel that I also had someone to rely on. But stories are always extremely cliched. Just when I thought I had met someone who could treat me sincerely, he changed his heart. He fell in love with my adopted sister. At first, it was just pity for her because of her childhood background. Then it was her lively and smart personality that deeply attracted his attention in every way. Later, as he listened to Linda tell him word by word about her love for dancing and witnessed her excellence on the stage, he finally realized his true feelings. Simon said that he had never met such a special person, as sincere as a ball of fire. Because of her, he discovered for the first time that love should burn passionately. For me, he felt more of an attachment like family affection and a habit in daily life. This was what Simon revealed when he was drunk. After that, he began to make elaborate preparations to pursue Linda and break up with me. Of course, I was also preparing for the same thing. I would withdraw from their world, just trying to do it as gracefully as possible. This was something I often did in the first 20 years of my life. I was used to not being cared about and leaving without a word. But all these thoughts changed the moment I opened my eyes after the surgery. I realized that it shouldn't be me who should leave. The first person to notice my change was my aunt. She sat by my hospital bed taking care of me, peeling an apple and telling some interesting stories to try to comfort me. Then she found that I didn't seem to need comfort. In her eyes, although I was quiet and didn't talk much, and rarely expressed my needs, but she could always tell from my eyes that I still longed for my parents' care from the bottom of my heart and that complete family affection that should have belonged to me. However, now, that longing was gone. After the surgery, I was almost unbearably indifferent. So on the 5th day, she tentatively asked me if I wanted to call my parents. I refused. In the past, even though my parents didn't care about my whereabouts, I would still report my situation to them immediately after something important happened. But this time, I had no intention of contacting them at all. My aunt looked at me with increasing worry. It was a long time before she sighed. She muttered to herself, "My eldest brother and his family will surely regret what they've done sooner or later." Half a month later, I was discharged from the hospital under my aunt's care. During this period, the doctor came to check my physical condition. When they asked if I felt any abnormalities, I calmly told them, "I've never felt this good before." All those chaotic emotions that often disturbed my mind and made me unable to think clearly under their impact were all gone. Now, I can calmly and rationally see many things clearly. For example, my parents really don't care about me, so I may not get a share of their inheritance after they pass away, but they may still put the responsibility of supporting them on me. As for the company that Simon and I founded together, since I'm always the one responsible for handling all the affairs, it's enough to have me in the company. I no longer beg them for affection. I won't give up even a single bit of the interests that should belong to me. The day my aunt accompanied me home, we happened to run into my parents, my adopted sister, and the whole family coming back happily from outside. My adopted sister won a big award in this competition. To celebrate, they stayed and played abroad for another half a month. They kept posting photos of their travels in their WeChat moments, but no one asked me what I wanted to say when I called that day. the beaming family entered the door and saw me standing pale in the living room. An awkward look appeared on the faces of the four of them simultaneously. Yes, 4 people. And Simon was among them. Sister, I won a big award this time. I invited brother Simon to our house to celebrate. You don't mind, do you? Linda was the first to react. She walked quickly over and affectionately took my arm. Simon also reacted. He seemed to want to say something, but after meeting my gaze, he finally didn't tell those lies in front of me. My parents also looked a bit uncomfortable and didn't respond. Instead, they gave me an expectant look. It seemed that they hoped I could be sensible and let the matter go without making a fuss. If it were before, I would have done that. After all, I had always been the most worry-free child in their eyes. But now, under their gaze, I gently pushed Linda's hand off my arm. Sister, Linda's eyes turned red almost instantly, and she looked so wrong that she was about to cry. Snow, what's the point of you, a grown-up, arguing with your sister? Why are you so unreasonable? My father immediately found a way to attack me and loudly scolded me. Simon also couldn't help but speak up to defend Linda. My mother didn't say anything, she just let me be scolded by them without making a sound. It wasn't until my aunt, who was packing my luggage upstairs, came down. She took my hand and was about to lead me outside. My father and Simon stopped talking then. Stop, where are you going? This time, it was my mother who spoke. The woman who always liked to show off outside how worry-free I was and then turned around and gave all the good things to Linda. I'm taking the child to my place to rest. If the child stays with you, who knows when you'll bully her to death. My aunt turned around, her eyes red, and said fiercely to them. My mother was stunned when she heard this and didn't argue with my aunt anymore. Instead, she turned her blame on me. Snow, you're a child of our family. Do you really want to go with your aunt? It won't sound good if that gets out. When she said this, she frowned slightly, and her tone was full of disapproval and a hint of complaint, as if my decision had caused her a great deal of trouble. She had always been like this before, knowing very well how to make me feel guilty with her gentle attitude. But now, I no longer felt the emotions that used to tug at my heart. So I told her the truth. Well, my aunt signed the consent form for my surgery. From now on, I only recognize my aunt as my family. What are you talking about? My father almost lost his temper immediately and walked quickly up to hit me, but was stopped by Simon. Taking advantage of this moment, my aunt pulled me away quickly. Only my mother's voice kept asking persistently behind us, surgery? What surgery? Why didn't you tell me? Even after my aunt and I got into the car, she still kept pounding on the car window. Seeing this, my aunt rolled down the window and kindly explained to her, do you know about the intracranial tumor removal surgery? A few days ago, your daughter had a tumor in her brain. Since she couldn't find any relatives to sign the surgery consent form, she almost missed the treatment. In the end, she had to come to me, and that's how the tumor didn't worsen. When she said this, my mother's face had turned completely white. Such a big thing. Why didn't she tell the family? She murmured to herself. My aunt then smiled and reminded her, half a month ago, Snow called you many times. My mother seemed to remember something. She unbelievably took out her phone and frantically searched for something on the phone interface. Sister-in-law, it's no use even if you find the call records. You did answer the phone, but who was patient enough to listen to Snow? You were all busy accompanying your adopted daughter to take the plane. After saying this, my aunt ignored her, stepped on the gas pedal, and drove away with me. That night, my mother tried to contact me but found that all her accounts had been blocked by me. My father, Linda, and Simon were also blocked together. My parents couldn't get in touch with me and, having just been ridiculed, were too proud to approach my aunt and uncle. They could only complain about me being stingy and unfilial to others in the relative circle. They said that I was jealous of my sister's excellence and winning the award, that I didn't tell the family when I was sick, and that I had embarrassed myself in front of my aunt. At first, when my aunt saw them saying these things, she was so angry that she laughed. She told me not to look at those group messages. Instead, she sent out my medical records from that time and the photos of her accompanying me in the hospital these days. And she specifically added my parents in the family group. My aunt asked them how their consciences could be so bad. Their biological daughter was seriously ill and hospitalized, and several times she was on the verge of death because of their delay in having the surgery, but until now, they hadn't shown any concern. They could even say that having a malignant tumor in the brain was a small thing and then turn around and smear their daughter who was still in the recovery period. My parents' lies were exposed, and they became furious in the family group. They sent several long voice messages to retort my aunt. However, my aunt ignored them and directly left the chat group. At night, my aunt held me in her arms as we slept, and her warm palm gently patted my shoulder. She said, "Good child, my elder brother and the others are in the wrong. Auntie knows you've done nothing wrong. If you feel sad, just cry it out. Don't hold it in and suffer from injustice yourself." Upon hearing this, I just looked at my aunt calmly. I told her that I wasn't sad at all, and in fact, not even a single ripple had stirred in my heart from beginning to end. When I saw my parents again, I no longer cared whether they cared about me or not. What came to my mind was how to sever the relationship with them. I wanted to avoid being entangled with them in an unclear way and being dragged down by them in the future, turning my life into a mess. In the moonlight, I saw the surprised look in my aunt's eyes. Her always loving eyes were wide open, and soon, they were filled with heartache. I knew there was something wrong with me. I could clearly recognize the emotions of others, but I myself couldn't feel any emotions. This might be a sequela of the surgery, but I didn't dislike this situation. On the contrary, I even thought it was better. I still maintained my ability to distinguish right from wrong, but I became more objective and rational in looking at things. For example, now, I clearly know that my aunt is someone who treats me sincerely, even if I can't feel the emotion called gratitude in my heart. I know that in the days to come, I should strive to show my filial piety to my aunt. As for my parents, they might have noticed my change, but they were still dreaming that I would take the initiative to go back, soften my attitude, and let them manipulate me as before. But they don't know that it's impossible ever again. Half a month passed, and my parents showed off in their WeChat moments every day how well they treated Linda, and they also had someone pass the message on to me. They wanted me to regret it. They wanted me to know that if I was sensible enough to soften my attitude towards them and flatter and show my filial piety to them like Linda, then they could treat me well too. Although I did act as they expected for more than 20 years of my life, finally, seeing that I remained indifferent, they panicked. One day, at the entrance of the company, I saw my parents, Linda, and the three of them. Standing beside them was also Simon, who had been missing for half a month. When Simon saw me, he instinctively opened his mouth to greet me, but in the end, he couldn't say anything. He just guiltily turned his head away. When Linda beside him saw this, her face immediately turned ugly. Different from the glamorous little princess in my parents' WeChat moments, Linda looked haggard at the moment, with red eyes, as if she had just cried. But her eyes lit up instantly when she saw me. They came with ill intentions, but I wasn't interested in watching their performance. Just as I was about to ignore them and walk in, my mother grabbed my wrist. She said, "Snow, Linda has severe depression because of her guilt towards you. The doctor said she needs the company of her lover. We've already asked Simon's opinion. You will surely give in to your sister, won't you?" Seeing that I didn't speak, she added, "Linda is now somewhat famous in the domestic dance industry. The family has spent so much money over the years to support her. As her elder sister, you can't just watch her career be completely ruined." My head hurt from her sharp voice. I silently pulled my hand back and looked at the four people in front of me, each with their own calculations. After removing the filter of family affection for them, I could see their hidden thoughts clearly. Even if Simon wanted to be with Linda, there were many decent ways for them to negotiate, instead of making a big fuss and coming to the company gate to force me to submit. After all, they were just testing my bottom line to see if I would still obey them as before and be willing to sacrifice my own interests indefinitely to satisfy them. Sure. After thinking for a moment, I gave my answer. However, before the people in front of me could show a relieved smile, I turned to Simon beside me and said, 3 years in university plus 3 years of starting a business, 6 years in total. I want 15% of the company's original shares as compensation." As if he didn't expect me to ask for compensation, Simon's face looked a bit pale. Just as he was about to say something, I increased the bet. "Once the compensation is in place, I won't say a word about you and Linda. Even if you get married in the future, you don't have to invite me, and I won't go back to live in the Lin family. As long as you don't bother me, I'll disappear completely from your sight. You don't want your dancing goddess to be called a mistress, do you?" As soon as I finished speaking, Linda almost immediately reacted. She didn't give Simon time to think. She hugged his arm and cried pitifully. Simon used to think highly of himself and regarded money as dirt. Now, he was in the age of being head over heels in love. In the end, he actually agreed. The company was established by Simon and me. I held 26% of the shares, and he held 35%. Over the years, I had successively bought back 10% of the shares. If Simon transferred his shares to me, I would become the largest shareholder in the company at present, and Simon was bound to be marginalized by me, to prevent Simon from going back on his word when he sobered up. I immediately took out my phone and asked my secretary to prepare the documents, and I also called a notary. The moment I got the shares, I sincerely wished Linda and Simon a long and happy marriage. I even sent them to the company gate, with the joy of a winner on her face. Linda looked at me and said, "Sister, you've already got the money, you can't pester brother Simon anymore in the future." I smiled and called the security guard beside me. I was just about to ask them to escort Linda and the others out. My mother came out from behind her and stared at me intently. She asked me, "What do you mean by saying you'll never go home again?" Seeing that I had no intention of answering, she started to accuse me while covering her chest. "You unfilial daughter, do you want to?" Extremely annoyed me. As she spoke, she put on the appearance of being sick because of me. But I would never feel guilty and soften my attitude because of her feigned illness as I used to. I didn't even look at her and turned to leave. Finally, the complacency in my mother's eyes disappeared. "Child, what's wrong with you?" She tugged at the corner of my clothes, her face full of panic, and even her voice asking me was trembling. She realized that her false pretenses, her tactics of retreating to advance, and all the means she used to manipulate me in the past could no longer work. Because I didn't care about her anymore and wouldn't compromise and give in for her sake. "Ms. Susan," I said softly. I looked at her and Linda's family standing behind her and slowly said, "In the future, your family should live well." "You ungrateful wretch, what are you talking about?" My father, who hadn't spoken and had let my mother play the good cop in front of others, was now anxious. He walked up quickly and stretched out his hand to hit me. Simon beside him wanted to stop him, but Linda pulled him hard. In the chaos, a group of bodyguards I had called in advance stood firmly in front of me. This time, it was my father's turn to be stunned. He covered his chest as if he was about to faint from anger at me. It was the same action as my mother's earlier. At this moment, Simon finally broke free from Linda's entanglement and walked up to me. He looked at me with disapproval in his eyes and said, "Snow, you can hate me, but uncle and aunt are after all your biological parents. What you're doing is too much." Yeah, that's right. I didn't have time to waste words with them, so I simply lowered my head and picked up my phone to deal with the documents. Simon was silenced by my indifferent attitude. Just as he was about to say something more, I had already raised my head and looked at him seriously. "Simon, there's nothing left to talk about between us. It's enough for you to leave the money. I really don't want to have too much contact with you." After seeing the cold and calm expression on my face, a trace of panic and helplessness finally appeared on his face. "By the way, considering your behavior of being absent from work for half a month without saying a word, we can no longer trust you. The company has officially decided to remove you from the position of CEO. I hope you can maintain good manners, don't pester us, and it's best to disappear far away." After saying that, I waved my phone at him and blocked his contact information on the corporate WeChat in front of him. Ignoring Simon's ugly face, I turned around and left gracefully. As expected, I took over Simon's previous position. I also joined forces with the other shareholders to put pressure on him. In the end, Simon had no choice but to sell the remaining shares in his hand. It seems that men can really affect one's career. After driving Simon away, the company's development started to thrive. In contrast, when I was making a fortune, Simon was still indulging in his role as a lover, focusing on his relationship with the sister of his former fiancé. Even at this time, they still thought they were the winners. Linda was extremely high profile. She took Simon, my parents, and checked in on various social platforms every day, showing off their family affection and love. Of course, Simon paid for all these expenses. Since my parents retired, their life had started to be in straitened circumstances. Over the years, all their savings had been spent on paving the way for Linda's dance career. Before, they relied on me to maintain their superficial glamour. Now, the whole family was sucking Simon's blood. The relatives we used to interact with didn't know this and kept flattering them for finding a wealthy son-in-law, just when they were all willing to be messengers and loudly publicize how happy their family of four was. I bought a new house for my aunt. I moved her out of the previous old residential area and into a single-family house in the city center. My aunt has never entered into marriage in her life, let alone had children. She has always treated me as if I were her own daughter. At first, she absolutely refused to let me write her name on the property ownership certificate. It was not until I told her that only when the house was in her name could we prevent those who wanted to mooch off me from scheming against it. I recalled the way I used to act coquettishly with her in my memory, imitated that intimate expression, and leaned against her shoulder. I said, "I'll live with you from now on, Auntie, don't dislike me." My aunt's eyes immediately turned red. She reached out and patted my back, soothing me softly. "No, no, as long as Auntie is here, you will always have a home." Snow. When my parents heard that I had bought a house for my aunt, they immediately became anxious and jealous. They rushed to the neighborhood where my aunt and I lived overnight. However, the security here was very strict. Since they didn't have their information registered, they weren't even allowed to stay in front of the gate for 3 minutes. My father called my aunt's phone and launched a fierce stream of abuse at her. In his words, my aunt became a villain with malicious intentions who was trying to sow discord between him and his daughter. My aunt listened calmly and then retorted, "Brother, do you really think I need to stir up trouble considering the things you've done to Snow?" My father's voice paused. Without giving him a chance to refute, my aunt continued to ask, "You say Snow is your daughter, but why is there no bedroom or wardrobe for her in your house? There are no chopsticks and bowls for her either. Even her photo is not in the family portrait. You keep saying she's your daughter, but where do you really place her in your heart?" I watched as my aunt spoke emotionally into the phone, and I walked over and hugged her from behind. I remembered that in the depth of winter, because I didn't have any winter clothes, I could only wrap myself in my spring and autumn school uniforms and shivered in the wind and snow. But when I got home, I found that there was no one in the house. My parents had taken Linda out to watch a movie. There were no leftovers for me in the kitchen, and I didn't have any money in my pocket either. Before fainting, I mustered my last bit of strength and walked to the entrance of my aunt's neighborhood. My aunt's house was 5 long streets away from mine. It seemed to be the longest distance I had ever walked in my life. If I had collapsed at any point in that wind and snow, I would never have been able to reach the haven. Fortunately, I made it. I saw my aunt, who was holding an umbrella and coming down to throw out the garbage. At the gate, I saw the shock and worry on her face. My aunt rushed over and hugged me, who had lost consciousness from the cold. From then on, I had a home again. My room was in my aunt's house, and my chopsticks and bowls were there too. She even bought back the piano that had been sold before and placed it quietly in the living room. I had long forgotten how to play the piano, but on that day, I secretly swore in my heart that as long as I was here, would be my aunt's greatest support in the future. So now, when my father on the phone was questioned by my aunt and didn't know how to respond, and started spewing a stream of swear words, I calmly took the phone and said to him, "Don't even think about the new house. If you say one more word, you won't even be able to live in your current house." I had forgotten about it until he brought it up. Not only the house, but also their living expenses had all come from my card before. Their meager pension and savings had been completely spent over the years on accompanying Linda to fly around the world to participate in competitions and hiring famous dance teachers for her. Even so, they still looked down on me in every way. The voice on the other end of the phone was silent for 2 seconds, and then came my father's thunderous roar. "Snow, you've gone too far. How dare you?" The louder he roared, the more guilty he felt. "I've already died once on the operating table. Now I'm not afraid of anything, Mr. Lincoln." I calmly stated my feelings. However, my father took this as a sign that I was complaining about them. He started to take a conciliatory approach, trying to play the good cop bad cop routine as he used to. He said, "After all, you're still blaming us for caring too much about your sister. Why don't you think for yourself how pitiful your sister is? It seems you really think your current place is too spacious." After saying that, I hung up the phone and immediately started contacting a real estate agent. While I was preparing to sell the house, my father and the others were still persistent. In order to force me to show up, they started following me and causing trouble in various places where I appeared. I ignored them for 3 days, had someone record videos to gather enough evidence, and then called the police. Soon, they were detained for 15 days on the charge of picking quarrels and provoking troubles. My parents thought they had lived a respectable life all their lives, but they never expected to be sent to the police station by their own daughter in their old age. In front of the police, they cursed at me and loudly accused me of being unfilial. I found it too noisy, put on earplugs, turned around, and told the police officer who came to mediate that I firmly refused to reach a settlement. When they were being taken away, my father, who had always been authoritative in my memory, looked at me with fear in his eyes. Realizing that I might really abandon them, he softened his tone towards me. He called my name, Snow, over and over again, which was a kind of intimacy that I hadn't been able to hope for since I was 10 years old, but I had long lost my emotions, so naturally, I wouldn't be soft-hearted towards him anymore. It was a pity that Linda managed to escape. When my parents were taken away, she and Simon rushed to travel in another city overnight, in order to protect the reputation of this rising star in the dance world that they had painstakingly cultivated. My parents insisted that they had planned this incident on their own, and there was definitely no instigation from Linda. I imagined Linda's despicable appearance, always eager to harm others. I guessed that I would have another chance sooner or later, so during this period, I sold the original house at a low price to a big guy with flower tattoos on his arms who had connections in both the legal and illegal worlds. Just like that, before my parents were released, Linda, who had returned from the trip, stood in front of the former home but couldn't get in no matter what. It was said that Linda didn't believe the house was gone at that time. She knocked on the door for a long time, demanding an explanation from the person inside. As a result, when the door opened and she saw the big guy, who was 9 meters tall, she was so scared that she didn't even dare to make a sound. Finally, Simon drove to pick her up and took her to his own home. A couple of days later, my parents were also released. After hearing that the house had been sold by me, they cursed and raged again, but no one dared to come and cause trouble for me anymore. Survival became their most pressing issue now. So soon, my parents packed their luggage and moved into Simon's house overnight. At first, Simon welcomed them. However, my parents had been used to putting on airs and being difficult towards me over the years. Without someone to lord over, they soon couldn't help but show their bad temper towards Simon. Simon was also someone who had never been wronged since he was a child. They soon had their first conflict. Before long, my parents moved out of Simon's house. He rented a separate apartment for them, which was half a city away from his home. My parents complained a lot to Linda about this. They said that when Simon was with me, he had never been so disrespectful to them. Why didn't Linda remind Simon more often in front of him? Linda herself still relied on Simon to spend money on her dancing. How could she speak forcefully in front of Simon? As time passed, in order to maintain her relationship with Simon, Linda gradually distanced herself from my parents. One ordinary day, when Linda went to visit my parents, she heard their complaints about Simon. They also reminisced about how smooth their lives had been when I was taking care of their daily needs. This was their usual trick, praising one person to belittle the other. In the end, it was all for their own benefit, but Linda wasn't going to fall for it. She had endured enough in these days. She immediately smashed all the things in the house that could be smashed, and then stood with her hands on her hips and asked my parents that since they thought I was so good, why didn't they come to find me? This was the first time she lost her temper in front of my parents. After securing Simon, her family was just a seasoning to add color to her life. She no longer needed to please anyone. That time, their quarrel was truly earth-shattering. The main instigator was my mother. She wailed and cried at the door of the rental house, grabbing Linda's hair and alternately calling her an ungrateful wretch who was unworthy of her teachings and investments over the years. At other times, she cursed me for being heartless, saying that things had been like this for so many years, and just because they missed one surgery, there was no reason for me to make such a big fuss. My father felt ashamed and smoked silently in the room. Linda didn't back down either. She fought with my mother and cursed her as a bloodsucker who was never satisfied. In the end, the quarrel ended only when people on the entire floor came out to watch. This incident became well known, and the relatives who used to flatter them also drifted apart and stopped having contact with them. One of the relatives told me about my parents' current situation and sighed as he spoke. Back then, the eldest and his wife liked to hear others praise them for being good at raising children. They said that Linda, the daughter of a comrade in arms, was raised like a princess, all because of their kindness. Who would have thought that in the end, they raised an ungrateful person? As he spoke, he glanced at me with a flattering smile. Snow, I think your aunt has a really good eye. She picked you, a precious gem. Now she can just enjoy a comfortable life. However, my aunt wasn't impressed. She unceremoniously drove the person out. The moment the door closed, she was still very angry. When you were little, he often laughed at you, calling you a wild child. Now that his son has graduated and needs to find a job, he comes to praise you. These people, they only flatter those in power and look down on the weak. I despise them. I didn't have much feeling about this. I had met too many such people in the first half of my life. But under the warm yellow light, I looked at my aunt's eyebrows that were furrowed with worry for me. Suddenly, a thin layer of warmth welled up in my heart, but it disappeared in an instant. It was at this moment that I vaguely realized that there were already a few white hairs mixed in my aunt's black hair. I stepped forward and held her hand, telling her not to be angry, and that I would treat her to a big meal. I said, Auntie, what he said is really wrong. It's not that you have a good eye and chose me, it's that I'm lucky to have met you, to have met her, who was willing to shield me from the wind and rain without any regrets. Among these ordinary and mediocre people, under the light, my aunt's eyes gradually turned red. She couldn't help but turn around and wipe her eyes. After a while, she turned back and smiled at me. She said, What silly words are you saying? I'm your aunt, your blood relative. It's only natural that I love you. I worked even harder. Because of my rational and objective perspective on things, the company's profits multiplied. My net worth also increased accordingly. The next time I saw Simon was at a business gala invited by a certain partner. Simon was wearing a carefully tailored suit and had styled his hair. However, it still couldn't hide the haggard look on his once high-spirited face. Upon closer inspection, the clothes he was wearing were from last season's style. It seemed that his life wasn't easy after supporting a whole family of bloodsuckers. It cost a lot of money to support Linda's dancing. And my parents also had a lot of living expenses. It would be fine if Simon was willing to yield to his family, but his parents had very high standards. They didn't like me, who started from scratch with Simon in the first place. Now they looked down even more on Linda, who could only cling to others. If Simon wanted his family support, he would have to break up with Linda first. It was obvious that he really loved her. So at this moment, he was willing to lower his pride and smile obsequiously at the small bosses he used to look down on. However, those people he used to look down on now seemed to look down on him too. The boss who was pestered by him immediately lit up his eyes when he saw me. He greeted me and walked quickly towards me. Seeing this, Simon didn't know whether to advance or retreat and could only stand there awkwardly. But the moment our eyes met, his eyes flinched. And he no longer had the high spirits he used to have. When the company was just starting up, Simon disdained the social interactions at the dinner table. I was always the one to handle these lower-level business matters. Now that the company and the partners were all on the right track, those people naturally only recognized me and not him. This was only natural. I didn't know what Simon was sighing about. But the next second, as if he had made a certain decision, he took a step towards me. I turned around and whispered a few words to the person beside me. The bodyguard accompanying me immediately blocked him. He couldn't even get within 3 meters of me and was finally politely escorted out of the venue. When the dinner ended at night and I was getting my car, I met Simon, who had been waiting nearby. I looked at him standing in front of me. I recalled our past in my mind again. After confirming that everything that had happened was clearly defined and there were no points of entanglement, I turned around without hesitation and was about to get in the car. Simon quickly reached out to stop me, and the car door crushed his palm, making a crisp sound of his finger bones breaking. Simon's face turned pale instantly. He pressed his injured hand tightly, but his eyes still stared fixedly in my direction. Do we really have to come to this, Snow? His voice was a bit hoarse with pain. I rolled down the car window, threw out a check for $100,000, and smiled gently at him for the medical expenses. Then, regardless of whether he would take it or not, I released my hand and stepped on the gas pedal and drove away. Since I saw Simon, I had been on my guard. This group of people were seriously at odds with each other and had started to scheme against me again. Sure enough, 2 days later, I saw Linda, whom I hadn't seen for a long time. At the entrance of the company, If I remember correctly, she should be participating in a very important competition at the city theater now. The organizing committee had sent me an invitation to watch the competition, and Linda's name was on the list of participants. But now, she wasn't even wearing her dance costume. She had deliberately put on makeup to make herself look haggard. It was obvious that she came here for me. When she saw me, Linda put on that pitiful expression of hers. Without saying a word, she came up and knelt down. "Sister, I'm begging you to let Simon go. He's your brother-in-law now. How can you take revenge on him like that just because of your relationship problems?" She sobbed and sighed, making it sound even better than an opera performance. I looked up and indeed saw several professional cameras among the crowd that was gradually gathering around. This was Linda's plan. I pulled her hand that was gripping me away and said in a cold voice, "Linda, let's make things clear. You were the one who first stole your sister's husband, and then you couldn't keep him in check, allowing him to follow and harass me. I took action against him in self-defense and also paid for his medical expenses. What else are you not satisfied with?" My voice was neither too loud nor too soft, just loud enough for everyone in the crowd to hear clearly. Linda's face turned pale, and her eyes looking at me were filled with venom. The whispers of the people around were getting louder and louder. I knew that she must have some backup plan. Sure enough, after Linda cried for a while longer, two familiar figures appeared in front of me. If I could still feel emotions, I would definitely not be able to hold back my laughter now. I have to say that their relationship is really strong. They had such an embarrassing scene last time, but they were still able to reconcile with Linda in the end. Unfortunately, I have no emotions now, so before my parents could open their mouths with their evasive eyes, I reached out and stopped them. I also signaled my secretary beside me to turn on the recording device, and several cameras were pointed directly at them. I calmly and slowly said, "From now on, every word you say will be recorded as evidence, and I will pursue its legal effect later. Even if half a sentence among them is slanderous, I will file an appeal and see it through to the end." When my father heard this, his face instantly turned pale. My mother mumbled her lips. She tried to speak several times but couldn't get the words out. I didn't have the patience to wait for her to gather her thoughts. I turned around and left. Only then did she rush up and hug my leg, bursting into tears. She asked me, "Child, what's wrong with you? I'm your mother. You didn't treat me like this before." She wailed about how difficult it had been to raise me over the years. She said that they already had a lot of pressure from adopting their comrade-in-arms daughter, and they had had a tough time these years. She said that I used to be a very sensible daughter who understood them in everything, just because they missed my illness once. How could I have become like this? Snow, Mom really regrets it. In the days when you ignored me, Mom was sad every day. The face that had always looked down on me with a superior attitude was now covered with signs of aging and vulnerability. She looked up at me, and this time there was a bit more sincerity in her sobbing. Seeing that I was indifferent, she tightened her grip on my hand even more forcefully. "Do you really want to treat your mother like this? Don't you want your mother anymore?" I looked down at those tear-filled eyes, and my heart didn't stir at all. Just as I was thinking about how to respond without causing too much negative impact on the company's image, a pair of strong hands suddenly pulled her away from my leg. I looked up and saw my aunt's eyes, which were almost red with anger. "Get out!" She pointed at my parents and Linda and shouted loudly, like a lioness protecting her cubs. She said, "I have evidence of all the things you've done in the past. Don't force me to make all of this public," she said. Snow has suffered so much to get to where she is today. Now that her life is just getting a little better, you're here to force her again. Are you really her parents? Enough. When did it become your business to butt in on our family affairs? My father's scolding voice came from not far away. Seeing this, my aunt suddenly gave a bitter smile and pointed at Linda, who had been silent all this time, and said to the onlookers, "Everyone, this is my brother's adopted daughter." The woman for whom my elder brother abandoned his biological daughter, Linda, who was named, suddenly shrank back, as if she realized something. She rushed towards my aunt in a panic, trying to stop her from speaking. Unfortunately, it was too late. My aunt turned around and said loudly to my mother, who was still sitting on the ground, "My elder brother doesn't have any deceased comrade-in-arms at all. The daughter he adopted is the child born from his extramarital affair with his first love after marriage." This sentence was like a thunderbolt striking down, making my mother, who already had empty eyes, get up from the ground. She looked at my father with a mixture of shock and anger. but she still didn't dare to be sure for a moment. It wasn't until Linda, beside her, couldn't bear the pressure and turned to squeeze into the crowd behind her, my mother suddenly woke up. Rushed over and grabbed her. She carefully examined her face for a while, and then suddenly slapped her hard on the face. Linda let out a painful scream. This slap was extremely hard. Since Linda came to the Lin family at the age of 6, she had always been treated like a precious pearl in the palm of the Lin family's parents' hands. She had never been treated like this before, and her usually innocent eyes were filled with tears. But the more she was like this, the more it irritated my mother. "Bitch, bitch, I treated you like my own daughter, and this is how you treat me." My mother picked up everything she could find around her as a weapon and whipped Linda again and again. The latter dodged awkwardly while casting pleading glances at my father. The people around were all watching the drama. No one expected that the family who had come here to question me would now have an internal conflict among themselves first. The paparazzi that Linda had called to secretly take photos had long been escorted out by my private bodyguards. When my aunt protected me and we left, at that side, my father had just taken a slap from my mother to protect Linda, and then he pinned my mother to the ground and beat her. Seeing that the situation was getting more and more out of control, the security personnel quickly cleared the scene again. Their family went to the police station again. This time, however, I brought the several paparazzi she had hired and the pre-edited news they had prepared to smear me, picking quarrels and spreading rumors. Linda couldn't escape any of the charges. In the end, Simon, who still had one hand wrapped up, rushed over from his home to pick them up. With such a big scene at the company entrance today, these things had already made it to the local trending searches. Simon might have already known the whole story on his way here. But when he really saw Linda in a sorry state at the police station, he still looked utterly disbelieving. "Linda, you should be at the competition." His eyes fell on Linda. When he saw that the clothes under her coat weren't even the performance clothes she hadn't had time to change out of, he became even more silent. At first, Simon's persona was that he loved Linda because of her obsession with art. He supported Linda's dancing, as if he was making up for the old self who was too cautious to boldly pursue his dreams. He even put aside his dignity and delved into the trivialities of life. But now, this persona was on the verge of collapsing. In order to smear her adoptive sister, Linda easily gave up the competition that she said was more important than her life. People are like this. Sometimes when they're carried away, they can ignore everything, but it only takes a moment for them to come to their senses. Seeing Simon's questioning eyes, Linda was obviously flustered. Tears fell from her cheeks one by one, and she quickly opened her mouth to explain. "Brother Simon, it's not like that. It's my sister. She had someone tamper with my competition. I had no choice but to do this. I just want to beg her to let me go." This was Linda's original plan. She came to the entrance of my company, joined forces with my biological parents to smear me, portrayed me as a vicious adoptive sister who was jealous and framed her adoptive sister. Then, taking this opportunity, she would accuse me of rigging the competition so that even if Linda participated, she couldn't get the award she deserved. Although she gave up this competition for this, she could use this wave of popularity to make herself famous, and thus it was a sure profit-making move. This was a risky move, but Linda, relying on my family to support her, made it recklessly. She thought she could nail me down under public opinion. But she didn't expect that my aunt would find out that she was actually the product of my father's extramarital affair with his first love after marriage. One false step, and she lost everything. Even now, she was still trying to shift the blame onto me, but before Simon entered the door, my assistant had already shown him the whole story, including Linda's transaction records with those paparazzi and the words they had edited to frame me. Many of the things in it hadn't even happened yet, but they had talked about them with such certainty. The organizing committee had also already issued a statement. They had been hosting the competition for decades and were known for their good reputation. They were extremely angry about Linda's behavior of not coming to the competition and still trying to smear them, especially since some of the senior members had a relationship with Simon's parents. Even if Simon wanted to cover it up, they already knew about Linda's existence. Simon's plan to slowly make Linda famous and then take her home had failed. I don't know what kind of mindset he had when he came to see Linda this time, but Linda's act of lying to him as soon as they met completely sentenced herself to death in Simon's eyes. The filter on Linda was shattered, and Simon's eyes looking at her completely turned cold. He didn't even say a word. He turned around and left, leaving Linda, who was stunned, watching as her last hope faded away little by little. Without Simon to compensate for her losses, Linda was happily given a 15-day detention. During this period, the organizing committee of the dance competition filed a lawsuit against Linda. With the interference of Simon's parents, the 15 days were extended to 2 months. My parents were also locked up together with her. They had lived a glorious life all their lives, but in their old age, they ended up in the police station twice a year. They were also exposed with the scandal of extramarital affairs. The more praise they had received for adopting Linda in the past, the more ridicule and shame they now had to bear. Before leaving, my father asked me for the last time if I really wanted to have such a conflict with them. I turned around and told him seriously, word by word, that I wasn't making a scene. I had just been caught up in things for so many years and wanted to get out of the undercurrent that had swept over me for years. I just wanted to live my own life well, no longer be bound by family affection, no longer have expectations of those who aren't worthy, no longer sacrifice myself by enduring grievances to gain a little bit of their attention. Do you understand? I don't love you anymore. This is the last time I'll call you Mom and Dad. From now on, let's all take care of ourselves, Mom and Dad. When the last words fell, I couldn't tell what my father's expression was. I turned around and left. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw that my mother beside me was already in tears. When she saw that I was about to leave, she opened her mouth in a hurry but finally didn't say anything. By now, she might really regret it. She had devoted her whole life, pushed her own daughter away with her own hands, and in the end, it was all for someone else's benefit. But what does all of this have to do with me? I've shed enough tears for them in the past 20-something years. Stepping out of the police station, my aunt was waiting for me at the entrance. She is one of the few people in the world who truly understands my father. She was worried that by making my father lose face like this, he might do something detrimental to me later. And Linda, she's not someone who can stay out of trouble, my aunt said, her brows furrowing with even more worry. I gently placed my hand on the back of hers and told her that we were no longer as vulnerable as we used to be. We could deal with whatever came our way. Upon hearing this, my aunt relaxed a little. After that, I always had someone keep an eye on the whereabouts of Linda's family. I learned that Simon and Linda had broken up. Linda refused to accept it and even went to Simon's parents several times to make a scene, so she was severely dealt with. My parents had invested all their wealth for so many years, but in an instant, Linda was blacklisted from the domestic dance industry. And there was no news of her since then. Without any support, Linda chose to bow down to my father and clung tightly to my parents. However, every time my mother saw Linda, she was filled with resentment. She wanted to divorce my father, but when he refused, she would scold and beat Linda all day long to vent her anger. During this period, my business continued to grow and showed a trend of expanding into overseas markets. Simon's parents, who used to look down on me, now took the initiative to send me an invitation. Simon tried to contact me several times, but I never agreed. Later, I met Simon again at a dinner party. He seemed much more mature than before, but his eyes were filled with deep melancholy when he looked at me. "Snow, you've become so excellent now that I can hardly recognize you," he greeted me, his eyes not knowing where to look. The man who had been confident for most of his life couldn't even straighten his back in front of me now. He didn't seem to have changed much, but he had lost his former pride. As if afraid of being driven away by me, Simon started talking rapidly to himself. He said he owed me an apology that he should have said in person. He said that after all this time, he finally realized that he had never really liked Linda. He had just projected his inner desires onto her, thinking that through her, he could find his true self. Only now do I realize how naive I was in the past. After losing you, I finally understood what I had truly lost. I listened to him impatiently. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore and stood up to leave. "Snow," Simon shouted my name loudly from behind. He asked me, "Can we start over?" "No, I'm not interested in rotten cucumbers." I smiled and refused him bluntly. "Simon, no matter how nice you talk, you can't change the fact that you couldn't resist the temptation of novelty and cheated during our relationship. It's really shameless of you to show up in front of me now." After removing the filter I had for Simon, I realized that the person I once regarded as a god in my heart was just like that. Moreover, I have long surpassed the position he once held. From now on, I will be the god who illuminates my own life. Perhaps because he was too stimulated by me. Not long after, I heard that Simon and Linda had hooked up again. Sure enough, there are only two situations for cheating, 0 times and countless times. But this time, Linda could no longer enjoy the treatment of being doted on as before. Simon showed his worst side to Linda without mercy. Linda was often beaten by him. Moreover, Simon would often try his best to belittle Linda verbally, calling her the most despicable woman in the world. He looked down on Linda but also wanted to gain dignity and satisfaction from her. During the time they were entangled with each other, my parents surprisingly reconciled. I heard that my mother was pregnant again. Having a child in her old age completely made her give up the idea of divorce, and she even accepted Linda. On a stormy night with thunder and lightning, an urgent call from an unknown number came to my phone. When I answered it, it was my father's flustered voice. "Snow, your mother fell at home and bled a lot. We really don't know what to do. I beg you to come and see her. After all, she gave birth to you and raised you for more than 20 years. After hanging up the phone, I calmly dialed the emergency hotline and called an ambulance for them. My aunt beside me looked at me worriedly and stood up several times to ask if she should accompany me out. "There's no need, I'm not a doctor, so I can't help even if I go," I said calmly. My aunt looked at me for a long time and finally murmured in agreement, "You're right, the weather outside is bad, and it's dangerous to go out." Listening to my aunt's words, a trace of doubt flashed in my heart. When I finished handling my official business in the middle of the night and was about to rest, my phone vibrated. When I answered the call, there was a burst of chaotic static. Without thinking, I hung up the phone. After exiting the call interface, I found that the number had sent me several text messages. The latest one was just a few short lines. "I'm sorry, a person like me really doesn't deserve to be your mother. Live well with your aunt, Snow. Mom is going to atone for her sins." Scrolling up, there were only 3 words. "Do not come." My heart suddenly skipped a beat, and a long-lost feeling of surprise and doubt welled up in my chest. I pulled out the chair and stood up, ready to walk towards the door. When my eyes met the window outside, where lightning flashed, thunder roared, and the rain poured down, my steps gradually slowed down. Finally, I took out my phone and dialed the police emergency number for the area where my parents lived. When I woke up the next day, it was the police who contacted me first. They told me that last night, there was a fire in the old neighborhood where my parents lived, and Linda, my parents, and Simon were all burned to death in the house. After their investigation, they suspected that someone had deliberately set the fire, because the forensic doctor detected an excessive amount of sleeping pills in the bodies of all 4 victims last night. For a moment, I couldn't tell how I felt. The emotional fluctuation I had when I saw the text message last night disappeared in an instant, and now I was back to being calm. My aunt, however, had red eyes when she looked at me. She hugged me in her arms and comforted me softly, saying that she would still be my family in the future. I lowered my eyes and didn't say anything. It was a long time later, after the police investigation results came out, that I learned what had really happened that night. It turned out that my mother wasn't pregnant at all. She wanted to divorce my father, but he thought it was embarrassing, so he tied her up at home. Linda had a hard time during that period, under the operation of Simon's parents. She was socially ostracized at university and blacklisted in the dance industry. She stayed at home all day and took her anger out on my mother. Of course, she hated me the most. She thought that everything she was suffering now was my fault. Plus, Simon always kept her at arm's length and often belittled her by comparing her with me. They wanted to use my mother to trick me over and then create an accident to kill me and divide my current property. My mother found out about this and actually offered to help my father. In my father's eyes, my mother also hated me, so he didn't guard against her much. So on that rainy night, my mother added sleeping pills to the food of my father and Linda and then called Simon over. Although Simon looked down on Linda, he still respected my mother. After he arrived, he was also drugged. My mother arranged the 3 of them together neatly and then lit the gas stove at home. Besides, we also obtained Ms. Susan's suicide note from your relatives, the police officer said as he handed me a letter. I opened it and saw that the paper had traces of being soaked by tears. "Snow, if there is still fate in the next life, I will definitely be a good mother. In this life, I'm going to atone for my sins first." I thought that if there really was a next life, it would be better not to be entangled again. Later, my aunt and I lived a good life. On a snowy day, I was making dumplings at my aunt's house. She had decorated the house in warm colors. When the first snowflake fell, she called me to have a meal at that moment. When I turned around, I saw my aunt's kind profile. A familiar warmth gradually welled up from my frozen heart, so I gave my aunt the first smile filled with gratitude that I had shown in a long time. Seeing this, my aunt stood there with a plate in her hand, stunned. Gradually, her eyes also turned red. We looked at each other and smiled. Finally, after going through countless storms, from now on, the road ahead will only be filled with blooming flowers and warm spring. After hearing the story above, what are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Looking forward to hearing from you. If you liked this story, don't forget to like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.